Welcome to the Whole Story podcast. This podcast series is focused on inspiring sustainability in agriculture, using the framework of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, also known as the SDGs. Each week, our guests are invited to share their story, highlight a particular one of the 17 goals, and leave us with some practical tips for sustainability on farms. I'm Becks Smith, founder of The Whole Story, a B Corp certified social enterprise inspiring, facilitating, and articulating holistic sustainability in agriculture. And this podcast has been brought to life in partnership with the incredible team at FMG, who are passionate about partnering with organisations like The Whole Story, so together we can support rural New Zealand. So whatever you're doing while listening to this episode, thanks for choosing us. The best way you can support our mahi is to follow and share the show on whatever app you're listening on, and I hope this episode leaves you inspired and excited about the bigger picture of sustainability in agriculture. Today on the Whole Story podcast, you get to sit in on a season first. I have an in-person conversation with the absolute powerhouse, Gill Naylor. Gill has had a career of taking deep breaths and stepping up when opportunities arise. She has a background of farming for 38 years with her husband Dave in Becks, Central Otago, and she worked her way up the community and voluntary role network to find her way to the National President of Rural Women New Zealand. This week's episode is based around UN Sustainable Development Goal 11, focused on sustainable cities and communities, which highlights the work that Rural Women New Zealand as an integral part of rural New Zealand, supporting viable rural communities and being their voice at the table. Sitting down for a coffee with Gill was a wonderful experience, and seeing her passion and pride for the mahi that Rural Women New Zealand does and the values that the organisation stands for was really humbling. So have a listen, and I hope that you learn a little something more about Rural Women New Zealand and enjoy some insight into the humble wahine toa at its helm. Welcome along, everyone. So today we have a podcast series first. We are actually recording this live in person, which is pretty cool. So I'd like to introduce everyone to Gill Naylor. Now, Gill is here with us today at the lovely Willow Glen Farms, and we look forward to hearing from you, Gill.
Thank you very much for having me, Becks. It's a great opportunity and I love what you're doing.
Cool, so let's crack into it then. And I guess what we'd like to hear first is the story of Gill Naylor.
Right, so I grew up on a farm about 20 minutes out of Invercargill. Very rural upbringing in a very small, very rural community. So yeah, thrown in headfirst into all the things that you do in small rural communities, like working bees for the local tennis club and going along to functions at the hall and all that sort of thing, and growing up on farm, doing all those lovely on-farm jobs that we got to do as kids, like feeding the lambs and helping Dad drafting and raking hay and all that kind of thing. So it was a really cool upbringing. And I've just carried on. I married a farmer, didn't I, in Central Otago? There wasn't really anywhere else I wanted to be other than on a farm.
That's really cool. And so something that's really important to me is sustainability. And it's a really big word, and it's what I've based my whole business around and this podcast series. But what does sustainability mean to you, Gill?
Right, so sustainability to me is quite broad. Holistically, it's got to be about the environment, but it's also got to be about financial viability for everyone, as well as looking after the environment so that it's still there and continuing to be there for us going forward. But we can't survive without viable businesses and viable communities.
Yeah, and that's so important to me. I think it's just so long in agriculture has sustainability become synonymous with environmental, and we've forgotten to take a step back and look at that bigger picture, that actually we need viable communities and economically viable businesses to be able to put in some of these environmental initiatives.
Absolutely, and that's where Rural Women New Zealand sits, that we're all about sustainable and viable rural communities.
Yeah, 100%. So one thing I do like to do with our guests is put you in the hot seat a little bit. And I would love to hear your funniest story relating to farming or agriculture.
It's not just one story, it's probably a series of stories, and it all relates around our lovely black cat that we had on the farm at Becks, where we were farming in Central Otago. He's one black cat with serious attitude. He had all the dogs under control, and He lived to the ripe old age of 19 years.
Wow.
He even survived a shift off the farm in the last couple of years. But he had to be in control of everything. This included coming down to the yards when we were working in the yards, drafting, scanning, you name it. He would walk along the rails, seriously supervising everything that went on. And if a dog dared to come near him, he would swipe them. He got to the stage he would walk up the steel rails on the drafting race, and at one stage he was actually sitting on top of the scanner's crate, looking and watching the scanner, scanning the ewes. It was priceless.
Chief supervisor.
Yes, absolutely. Such a character.
Now, Can I ask what the black cat's name was?
Oh, Jack.
Jack.
Of course.
I love that. A good strong name for a cat. We've got a ginger cat called Colin. They're quite cool to have around.
Oh, yeah, and he did have serious attitude. One of his last things that he did was sitting in the middle of a group of 10 or a dozen of the family, trying to figure out logistics for where we were going to go and what we were going to do. And he just sat in the middle like Lord Muck and watched us all trying to decide. Totally in control.
Yeah, it sounds like he definitely had the steer over the situation.
Certainly did.
So, going a little bit more into your career journey, and tell us a little bit more about your journey to Rural Women New Zealand.
Right, so I grew up watching Mum going to, that was Women's Division of Federated Farmers then, Women's Division meetings in our local area, and seeing what she was doing in the community through Rural Women and the other various groups. And I got to Becks, and once we'd had our children and they were at school, I joined the local group there because I really liked what they did in the community service aspect. I love the community service. And also they had lots of fun together. They were a great group of women, and it was a really good connection into the community.
That's such an important part of living in the rural communities that we do and raising young families, is that connection and having those good people around you to support you.
Oh, absolutely. And realistically, the only way things get done in rural communities if volunteers do them, and an awful lot of the time those volunteers are the women in groups like Rural Women New Zealand in the rural communities.
And then I guess perhaps a little bit more on your progression through Rural Women and where that's taken you now.
So every now and again there would be an opportunity that would come up for me to represent our group at the next level within the organisation. And as these opportunities came up, people would say, yeah, you could do that. And I'd be like, oh, okay. And then it got to the stage that it was an Otago Southland leader, and it was, oh, okay. And then the national board, and there was a few more deep breaths, and oh, okay. And then it was the national president, and there was even more deep breaths, and some people that I really trust and respect saying that you can do this. It definitely wasn't a person that was out there, I'm going to be here, I'm going to be there. I was more the quiet one that just, it took people to have faith in me for me to believe that I could do it. So here I am, and I hope I'm doing it well.
Isn't it interesting that, and I'm so pleased that those people around you had that faith in you and that confidence and could see what perhaps you couldn't at that time, because look at where you are. Exactly. And what you've managed to achieve.
Yeah.
And do you feel that confidence in yourself now that you've got there and you're doing it?
It's definitely growing. I still pinch myself occasionally because there's some awesome opportunities with this role. And I've got a fantastic team around me, which is amazing support. Fantastic team of staff and board members and members as well. So, yeah, it's all good.
I think it's such an important point as well, the impact of those people believing in you and having that confidence in you and pushing you to do something perhaps you wouldn't have done. I think that importance that we remind ourselves to do it for other people too, because you think what might have slipped through the cracks if someone hadn't actually said to you, go on, you can do this. And the importance that we must do that to other people, pull people up behind us and actually give other people that affirmation that they actually can do something. You have the skill set and that you should be a seat at that table, because some people don't necessarily have that confidence in themselves yet.
Absolutely. And that's what really gives me a buzz, is seeing other people that I've helped to do stuff that they didn't think they were doing. Watching other people succeed when I've helped them along that way a little bit really gives me a buzz, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's something that does shine through a lot in Rural Women, specifically the work that Rural Women New Zealand does. that support for others on their journey and that helping people along and lifting people up.
Absolutely, yes. Especially the likes of our business awards and our activator sessions that we have just run. It's amazing watching the effect that those awards and that process has on those that enter. And the winners, it's huge, and it really is really amazing, yeah.
Yeah, I can probably speak to that a little bit personally as well, as I've been part of the Activator program this year, and the value that gave me and the network I've been able to create as a result. And actually just speaking to a couple of other members of the Activator group from this year this morning, arranging some different things to catch up and collaborate on. So such an important program and so valuable, and yeah, can definitely highly vouch for that program and the work that you do.
Oh, thank you very much. There we go. That's given me that buzz. We're helping people.
Yeah, 100%. So, yeah, the Whole Stories work, and specifically this podcast series, is based around the framework of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And this episode in particular is based around goal number 11, which is making cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. So let's dive into that goal a little bit and discuss the good work that Rural Women New Zealand is doing to create progress towards targets within this goal. So really specifically around sustainable communities, because that's something that I think is just so important to Rural Women New Zealand.
It is, it really is. If we can encourage sustainable and viable communities, that is go-to. If our councils can give good examples of sustainable practices, ensure that their infrastructure and things like public transport and that kind of things in the more urban centres is sustainable and available, then that is huge, and it sets a good example for everything else. As far as Rural Women New Zealand is concerned, as an organisation, we promote empowering our women to be at the table, helping to make those decisions and promoting sustainability where we can, and as I say, both as environmentally and economically.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. And what most of our listeners probably don't even appreciate is actually the policy and advocacy work that Rural Women New Zealand does. I mean, that's a big part of actually the work you do. I wonder if you could discuss that a little bit.
Nationally, we focus on rural communities. So it's more about the people, and also, it's the whole community. It's not just industry-based. We have some fantastic industry bodies out there doing amazing work for our primary industries, but our focus is on the community. So we'll focus on the people who are in our rural communities, and that includes our small towns, our regional centres. We have social inclusion and community portfolio. We have health, and we also have education and business and technology on that side of things, and we also have environment and land use. Technology is huge, and there's some movement there, and we keep pushing for more movement because we do appreciate the difficulties. And in the health space, well, everybody will be aware that health has a fairly massive focus at the moment, and we are fortunate to be in contact with the government around the rural health strategy and the women's health strategy, and such a lot of intersectionality between the two there. We have a really vital role to play there in the voice for rural communities and women living rurally and getting access to those services. We have connections with Haora Tai Whenua, which is the Rural Health Network. That is a non-governmental organisation that brings together all practitioners, all facets of health operating in rural New Zealand. So we have some really valuable links there. Education, we're a member of the Rural Education Reference Group, which is a group of organisations that deal in education provision in rural New Zealand. So that's really important too. So that gives us a link into government as well.
I mean, that's a whole side of Rural Women New Zealand that I don't think everybody would be aware of, because, you know, it's not just all about jams and pickles and meeting around having coffee, and that's what sometimes I think that these sort of groups are seen as, but it's deeper than that. There's actually a real purpose to the organisation.
There really is, and on an international level we are also a part of the Associated Country Women of the World, and that is an international organisation of women's groups kind of similar to ours, and they're there to amplify the voices of rural women around the world and just aim to see systemic change and empower women to be involved in decision making in their own communities. That's quite challenging in an awful lot of countries. We are so fortunate here in New Zealand. ACWW, they also have links through to the United Nations and discussions and things at that level. So actually Next year, there's an ACWW conference in Malaysia, and we have 2 resolutions going forward to that. One around rural impact analysis and gender impact analysis, and another one around the importance of women's employment action plans. So we're pretty excited about that as well.
That's really, really cool. A seat at the global table.
Yeah.
So I think it can be fair to say that Rural Women New Zealand is definitely working towards targets within that goal, and, you know, not just working towards meeting those targets, but actually playing a pivotal part in being that voice at the table for rural women in New Zealand. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. You know, I can speak as one of these rural women that I know a lot of our listeners are, and say thank you, because it means a lot to us to have that voice at the table.
Thank you.
So I guess looking at all of the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which one of those do you align with most personally, and why?
The one I choose is Goal 4, Quality Education, which is inclusive, equitable access to learning opportunities for all. And the reason I've chosen that one is because it's an essential building block to all of the other SDGs. If people are educated, and that can be either through just basic learning skills, your literacy and numeracy, your food and nutrition, right through to your expertise in various fields, that just opens the doorways to so many opportunities and solutions that people can meaningfully provide for their communities. And I think that it is where the answers will come. It has to come from educating people, really, to get right to all those high-level goals. And it gives people an opportunity to make a really meaningful contribution to their communities. And I think that's what we all strive for, really.
Yeah, and it's so true. I mean, you see it yourself in rural communities where you look at people's background in education and what they bring, the range of skill sets that are brought into rural communities as a result of the education that people have either taken away locally or from a different area and brought back in. What a meaningful goal to be aligned with, because it does all start with their education and what people can then grow and take into the world.
And it also brings in your learning to treat everybody equally too, to have no bias in any particular way, shape or form. That's about learning equality and treating everyone as individuals and equally, which is really, really important as well.
Another thing that makes me reflect on is actually that values alignment for you. That's obviously a personal values alignment with a goal. And then to see that echoed in the work that Rural Women New Zealand is doing in the education space, it must feel really good to be working in alignment.
Absolutely. Education and social inclusion is a big one. It really is, yeah. And pay equity across ethnicities in New Zealand too, along with the Mind the Gap program as well. Yeah, there's lots of things going on and lots of opportunities that really sit well within that Goal 4 in the education.
Yeah, there is, and I think it's a really good goal to show a lot of the interconnectedness between other goals, isn't it? Because the impact that poverty has on quality education, and then the impact that education has on gender equality, and what you've just referred to is how interconnected they all are.
Absolutely.
Because how much one influences the other, and how if we can actually just get everybody to get good quality education and learn how to be good citizens, how to gain a good skill set to take into the world, what value that'll be.
Absolutely.
Gill, what do you see as the biggest challenge to New Zealand's agricultural sector regarding sustainability, and how would you flip the script on that and turn it into an opportunity?
The avalanche of regulatory processes that's just becoming overwhelming for many at the moment. It's disincentivising entry into primary industries, and that can actually create its own downward spiral of the industry itself, and it just puts so much pressure on. Our primary industries workforce is the best advocate for entry into the sector, and they're taking a hammering at the moment. So they're not going out saying, this is a great place to be and work. That downward spiral is starting, and I think we need to try and turn that around. And a way to turn that around, there's many that are embracing the innovation and research and learning opportunities, and they're ready to meet these challenges that they're being faced with a positive mindset. We're part of the New Zealand Landcare Trust, and catchment groups are a great example of the groups of landowners getting together to work towards more sustainable outcomes for the environment, but that also needs to be viable financially for their farming businesses. In discussion groups and industry-led seminars, that's another tool. Just to embrace those learning opportunities that come your way and be ready to adapt and looking for opportunities to make the most of improving your farm business. It's not to say that it's bad at the moment, but if there are ways that it can be improved, then why not look at them? And if there's good science behind it, then go for it.
Yeah, I mean, what's the famous saying by, is it Maya Angelou, is, you know, do the best you can until you know better, and when you know better, do better.
Yes.
And so I think that there is a bit of that, but also
Yeah.
a common theme that's coming through with a lot of the guests we have on the podcast is that having the mindset to be able to embrace change and find the positive opportunities, that's what we need to be able to face some of these pressures.
We really need to build those support networks around our rural communities at the moment too, because those pressures are massive and so many are just shutting down because it's just too hard, and we need to turn that around somehow and have the resourcing to support turning that around. And perhaps it's about rephrasing how things need to change so that people can actually be empowered to make those changes rather than feeling that they just have to do it, which turns it almost into a chore rather than incentive to do it.
Yeah, give the power back to the people who have the knowledge and the experience on the ground to be able to have a bit of autonomy to make their own destiny as it would be. And yeah, how good are catchment groups?
Absolutely.
Like, such a positive opportunity for the industry and so wonderful to be a part of and see the momentum they're gaining and actually the degree of change they're being able to implement into communities. It's very, very cool.
It is, and it's like a support group in a way too, to encourage that change and to buy into it together. You know you've got colleagues around you that are thinking the same and wanting to make improvements, and it's a really positive space to be in.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I just love the work that catchment groups are doing and really fortunate to be a part of one here. So what's on the cards for the next 12 months for Gill Naylor?
Well, as I mentioned before, we have a certain Associated Country Women of the World Conference happening in Malaysia in May next year. And we have 2 resolutions there to put, which is pretty exciting for us, really. And we have also actually presented on those at when Commission for the Status of Women international conferences as well. So it is really exciting, and I think a lot of that speaks volumes about the good work that is happening here in New Zealand and the opportunities there. So that's May for me. And then we're actually going to carry on from Singapore and have a little bit of an OE that we haven't been able to do while we've been farming, and we're going to Europe. So
how
really
exciting.
looking forward to that. Yeah, we can actually take 6 or 7 weeks and go to Europe, which will be really good.
So where are the highlights in Europe that we're looking forward to going and seeing?
Well, it's all a very quick trip, really, because we have only got 6 weeks. I've got a friend in Ireland. There'll be London, there'll be a little bit of Wimbledon, there'll be Paris, there'll be Amsterdam down to Venice and Rome, and a little bit of a cruise on the Med.
Just a wee casual cruise on the
Just
Med, you know.
Just a wee one.
From Central Otago to the Med. That'd be good. What a chance to see. And, you know, exactly that. Take a break after the years you've put in on the farm. Without having the opportunity to take those extended breaks overseas, you'll be really looking forward to getting away and seeing a little bit of the world.
It was supposed to happen in 2020, but something got on the road, didn't it?
Yes, no. Still seems to be having a little lingering effect on people's travel abilities, but it's good to see the world opening up again and good to see people exploring back this way as well.
It is. Yes, absolutely. It's another critical earner for us as a country, and even in rural New Zealand, you just look at things like the rail trail and all the other cycle trails and other rural opportunities there are for tourism around. It's a fantastic asset to our rural communities and brings such diversity of income streams and things to rural. We are far broader than primary industries in rural New Zealand.
Yeah, we are, and it's so nice to have that choice as well. And I think led a lot by our women in rural communities is the tourism side of things, accommodations and farm stays and different things like that. So really good to see a diverse range of options for women on farms to be able to explore different career paths.
Absolutely, and with technology being what it is, that has enabled a whole range of people to live regionally and rurally in New Zealand and do whatever it is they choose to do. Everybody is so much more flexible and so much more able to carry out all manner of businesses from wherever they really want to in New Zealand, as long as the connection is good.
Yeah, and that's certainly one of the biggest challenges we face is actually to get technological implementation on farms and across our rural sector. We need the infrastructure in place to be able to support that.
We do, indeed. And that's what also our business awards absolutely totally showcase what is happening in rural and regional New Zealand. It's so exciting and so inspiring to see what everyone is doing out there. It's truly, truly amazing.
Yeah,
it's such a positive news story.
There are some clever cookies out there in rural New Zealand, that's for sure. So I guess we really like to leave our listeners back down at the ground level. And so I like to ask this last question. From a real practical standpoint, what is one take-home action that farming businesses can do to contribute to sustainability?
Embrace learning opportunities, encourage continuing research, and be willing to adapt to more sustainable working practices. It's that whole education piece again, and being ready to adapt and embrace change.
I think that's wonderful. That was such a concise way of summarising some really clear steps that people can take. I'd really like to take the time now to thank you so much, Gill. This has been really special actually doing this in person. It's really great to be able to sit across the table from someone and see their face and see their passion in what they do, and to get excited about the opportunities with someone in person. I think that's something that probably in the post-COVID or the COVID lingering world, actually we've got very used to doing a lot of what we do remotely and not with a face-to-face interaction. And this has been really, really special to actually connect and be able to do this in person. Yeah, I want to thank you so much for your time today and your generosity of spirit, but also your generosity of just that level of experience, and also for having the courage to take people's suggestions or pushes into different facets of your leadership career, because I know that what you're doing is so valuable and that you're wonderful at your job. So thank you so much for the contribution you make to Rural Women New Zealand and our rural communities.
Oh, thanks so much, Becks, and to you too, the work that you're doing here to encourage sustainability and just to look holistically at everything we're doing in primary industries and in rural New Zealand. It's a really valuable way to move forward for us all, I think. So wish you all the best with your whole story. And yes, thank you so much for the opportunity. And with living not too far away from here, it was ideal to come down to Ranfurly and come and see you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Whole Story podcast. We really hope you enjoyed it and are feeling inspired and optimistic about putting sustainability into practice on farm. I have one last request for you before you go. Make sure, whatever platform you're listening to us on, that you hit follow and share the show or episodes with your friends, so that together we can grow our community and inspire sustainability in agriculture in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And thanks again to FMG for partnering with The Whole Story, so that we could bring this podcast to life for you all to enjoy. Catch you next time.